31st.
All right. What is your name? Your whole entire name?
William Lamar Montgomery.
Alberta West Montgomery.
Where were you born, and what was the date and year?
Uh, Belleville, Alabama, October 12, 1924.
Bonneau, South Carolina, 1926.
Tell me about growing up. Tell me about some of your tell me about your childhood, Grandpa. Tell me a little bit about your childhood.
I was born in Belleville, Alabama, and I grew up in Atmore, Alabama, and I went to school in Atmore, Alabama. I was drafted in service in World War II in Atmore. It was 1943, I think it was, about 1945, I think I was drafted to go into service in the Navy. And I served in the Navy. After the war, I stayed on in the Navy, and I stayed 24 years.
What made you join the Navy, Grandpa? Was this before you met Grandma or after
I was
you
drafted,
met Grandma?
and I don't remember the day of draft.
But why did you choose to enter into the Navy?
He didn't choose it.
Okay.
They chose him.
They chose a public seat. I was drafted during the war. They sent for anybody for, when you got there, they put you in the service that you,
So you didn't sign up
I asked
for
to go in the Army, and they gave me the Navy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about the racial makeup of the country during that time. You know, tell me about some of your experiences.
Yeah. At that time, it was segregation enforced, segregation of the races. And so it was kind of tough on black people because you got taken advantage of, we thought, and we were sure of that. You had to sit right on the back of the bus or sit at certain places separated from the white population. And you was taken advantage of, we felt, because we were black. And definitely we was, because we got the short end of everything. And then in 1946, I think it was, when President Truman was elected to office, he fought to the end this segregation thing, and so finally the Congress passed legislation that would free the black people from segregation. And I mean by segregation, when you went to any place, there were 17 southern states, and I lived in Alabama, and Alabama was one of them that had offered segregation policy. And you ride the bus, a train, or something like that, you had to sit in the back because in the engine from the bus was in the back of the bus.
It was hot.
And that's why the heat was, so black people have to sit in the back of the bus. And also with the train, I had to sit in the front rows of the passenger cars because the engine there was smokestack that ran by coal, and a lot of the cinders, the smoke came out. But the first few cars caught the worst part of it, and that's for on the buses, black people rode in the back, and on the front, in the train, they rode in the front because they were, had to catch all the wood smoke and cinders and whatnot from the engine. And also when we went to schools was segregated, and we had black schools and white schools, and because the black schools was given less money per child was the state government would pass legislation for the black children to get the schools to get less money to pay the teachers. The teachers wasn't paid the same as the white teachers paid. They were paid much less, and the quality of education did not come out as good for white children as it did for black children. We suffered through that until President Roosevelt suggested legislation to put an end to it, but he died in office, and President Truman came from, his home was in Missouri. He came into office because he was the vice president when President Roosevelt died, and then he went to Congress and begged them to lift these segregation laws, and therefore, when Congress did pass legislation that gave it segregation, 17 southern states from the South, 17 states out of the 48 states practiced segregation, and black people got the worst of anything. Right back of the bus, that's why the engine was, and caught all the smoke and stuff. On the train, you rode first cars because the engine to the train was on the front, and the cars that followed, the first few cars, caught all the smoke and cinders.
Grandma, tell me some of your experiences growing up dealing with segregation.
Well, actually, ours were about the same.
Okay.
Different states, but
17.
all in the South. He was in Alabama, I was in South Carolina. Now, some differences with us is that my father and grandfather owned their property, as opposed to Bill's family first just living on somebody's property and working for them. We didn't have to do that growing up because we owned our own thing. My father was a minister, and my grandfather was a minister. My grandfather owned a lot of property, and as a result of that, he was able to rent property to people and that kind of thing.
How was he able to acquire that land being a black man?
Being a black man, that's a good question that we used to ask Grandpa all the time because he owned so much land. And so we used to ask, Grandpa, where'd you get this? How did you get this land? You know, and he said, how do you think I got it? I bought it. You know, he answered us like that. But we had our own little reasons. We would say, well, he came from slavery, so his slave master must have given him some land, and then he added on or something. He didn't tell us that. We just assumed that. But
so he did come from slavery, huh?
Oh yes.
Did he ever talk about those stories?
No.
No.
No. And I tried to remember as a child one day talking with him. I wanted to know how he got the property he got, because he owned it was just a rare thing for a black person to own 1,000 acres, you know. And so I would try to ask him, Grandpa, how'd you get this? Where did this go? But he didn't like you to ask him questions and that kind of thing. But he owned a lot of land, owned a big, fine house, and we just couldn't understand how he got it, because he was the only one in the area that had that kind of and understanding. And of course he was a minister, yes, but nobody else. Even my father was a minister, but my father didn't own it like.
Is that land still in the family right now?
It's some of it is still there. but not all. My nephews and whatever, they sold some of it, and some built on some and kind of thing. But the majority of it, a canal came through. The Santee Canal, you might see it written on something.
Okay.
The Santee Canal came through the area where we were born and took that whole area through their thousands of acres to build this canal. So nothing in that particular area where we were born, nothing stands there now. However, when the canal announced it's coming through that area, my grandfather owned some land in another section, so he was able to move to the land that he owned, wherein my father had passed at that time. So my older brother went into another little area altogether, found some land that was reasonable, and he bought that area and built a house which still stands there today. And his family still owns that property. But growing up in our situation, there was so much you didn't understand and couldn't ask questions, or if you asked questions, nobody gave you the answers, you know? So it was just a terrible time. What made my life a little different from my husband's life is the fact that we owned, my father and grandfather owned their property. They didn't have to rent or live in anybody else's situation. They owned their own property. So when it came such that they needed to build something or whatever, they had the property to build on and did that. But as a whole, everybody suffered during that area, and it's still, whether people want to admit it or not, it's still a lot of racial suffering going on down there even today, although the area is different, but it's still a lot of mess down there.
Grandpa, you talked about, you told me before about your situation growing up. Your family was sharecroppers, and the person that owned the land was used to take advantage.
No, my family.
No, his family. Yeah, his family.
Yes.
And how the person that owned the land would try to take advantage of you all. Can you recall that, Grandpa?
So again,
That situation what happened when you were growing up with the person that owned you all's land?
yeah, no. My father was a sharecropper. Now, a sharecropper was a person who said the white people owned the land, large farms, and they would normally get black and Negro men with families to live on the property. They lived on the property, but we didn't have to pay rent, have any expenses at all, because the white people who owned the property, they furnished the house and the land, but in order to live there, they had to work for them and become their slaves to a sense, because slavery had been abolished sometime before I was born, and when about time I was born, things was not bad it was when the slavery was there, but then we went to school in segregated schools, and that was mean. Black schools was every dollar spent on white schools, something like 80% of it went to white schools, and then only 20% of the allowance for the state went to black schools, and therefore there was a difference in the teachers' pay, and a difference in the upkeep of the property and the condition of the schools. it was a tough time to live because the states had the right, because they were members of the United States, they had the right to run the state the way they wanted to run it. So we had some governors who took advantage of the opportunity, and they run for office and promised the whites that they would give them so much if they so many privileges if they were put in office. So to put in office, and then some of the first thing that came was black people was segregated, and that was a state had laws that were superseded the United States Constitution, and the Constitution stood by and let's let them run it the way they wanted to run it. Like I went to a segregated school, we was getting like out of each dollar allowed for school, the white schools got something like 70 or 80%, and the black schools only got to rush 20 and 15 cents out of the dollar. And so you can see the difference in the condition of the schools. And so the teachers, white teachers, they got good salaries. Black teachers had black teachers. For black children, they had very good schools, plus they had good teachers because they got teachers who were well prepared. Black teachers, like my mother was, she was just finished high school, and she was given license to teach in the black schools, and people along that time. And now for the quality of education came because of the quality of the teachers, the preparation they had. And anyway, it was a tough time to live because black children got a much shortage on the quality of education that they received. And some went to college, had black colleges, and the black college was just like the school to a great extent. They weren't prepared as well as white teachers, and therefore black children end up with a less qualified
educated
for life.